Hi everyone. This episode we spoke to Tom Hourigan, a senior BBC journalist who you can hear on Radio 2, 5 Live, 6 Music and much more. Our conversation looked at his health anxiety and particularly how he is coping when having to be constantly plugged into the news around coronavirus. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a rating and a review on iTunes. Hi Tom, how are you?
Hi, I'm not too bad. Sweltering in my spare room on another bright, hot, sunny day. We're recording this at the end of May as we come towards another area of coronavirus lockdown being eased, and the only time that I've spent outside today was in the queue at Tesco. So,
Oh no.
so longing to get back out into the wild at some point.
Whereabout are you, in central-ish London then, or?
In South London,
Okay.
moved at the end of last year. Unfortunately, now I have some green space to look at, which is definitely a good thing. If we can't be out in nature, at least I can look at it.
Yeah, definitely. So we always start by asking what your kind of personal experience journey with mental health looks like.
Well, personally, I've been living with health anxiety for the last 11 years. And in that time, there have been big ups and big downs, and I'm sure we'll come to talk about those. But more recently, with coronavirus, this has had a bit of a crossover into my professional life. I'm a journalist at the BBC. I'm also a newsreader on several radio stations, including Radio 2 and 5 Live. So I'm talking about coronavirus at the moment all the time. And for someone who has health anxiety, where in the past I've gone out of my way to avoid looking at lots of stories about health content as much as I can within my job, because obviously at times that's part of my job. This has been a bit of a challenge and something that I've had to get my head around, because I've got no choice. This is my job, and I understand that I've got to talk about this crisis, this thing that we're all living through, and impart very important information to the public. It's just how my mind processes that and what I do when I get home at the end of a shift and how I react to that. And it's been interesting and something that I perhaps didn't anticipate at the start of this, although I think, for many of us, all of our lives have changed in some way in the last couple of months or so.
We'll come back to the coronavirus stuff a bit later on. How did you first notice that it might have been a problem?
This started back when I was doing my journalism training, actually. So this was 2008-9. And I had an infection that wouldn't go away. And I was sent for test after test. Didn't really get to the bottom of it. Was sent to hospital for a test. And nobody could really tell me what it was or what was going on. They didn't think that it was anything particularly serious, and it was chalked up to being just one of those things. Now, after the first round of tests, because unfortunately there were more than one, I kind of shrugged it off because doctors didn't seem particularly concerned, and I'd seen hospital consultants as well as my GP, so there'd been a mix of opinions, and I thought, well, if there's anything to worry about, then surely they would have flagged it up and I'd be having treatment of some sort. So that didn't happen. Problem is, with my job, I've moved around a lot over the last 10 years from radio station to radio station in different parts of the country. That's meant that I've had to move home. And so I've been registering at different GP practices. And most GP practices, when you go and register, ask you to have a sort of initial medical. And every time I was having a urine test, this same thing was coming back up again. And so a GP would look at the results and they go, oh, don't like the look of that. Let's go and have you tested again. So I went into this hamster wheel of tests. all along the same lines, including some quite uncomfortable procedures. If you've ever heard of a cystoscopy, you've probably had one, I would imagine. It's where a camera is put somewhere where you really wouldn't want a camera to be. So to go through that more than once and to again be told, well, we can't really find anything. The results are just abnormal, but there's no specific cause behind them. And the more that kept happening, my mindset started to change. And I'm thinking, all these tests keep coming back and showing up a positive result of some sort. Is something going on? Is this something I actually do need to be worried about? And then, must have been about 5-6 years later, I suddenly started having a lot of stomach aches and sort of general uncomfortableness, if I can call it that. And I started to think, well, actually, is this something serious? I know that the other problem hasn't been diagnosed, but what about if this one goes undiagnosed? I better go and get it checked out. So that started another series of medical appointments. And in the end, culminated in having various procedures and checks. Nothing was found. At the same time, I ended up having another urine test during this process, and I had more tests for that once again. And this time they found something. They found something very small on the lining of my bladder, actually. And to see that after all the negative results, something had actually come back, it was a bit of a shock, to be honest, but it was the thing that I'd been dreading for a number of years. And so we get to the point that they biopsy it. I'm put under a general anaesthetic for the first time in my life. I'm on my own in hospital, pretty terrified, to be honest. And after the procedure, they go, well, we'll give you the results in about 3 weeks. Those were, quite honestly, the longest 3 weeks of my life.
I can imagine.
And it's the same, you know, I don't see myself as a special case. It's the same when anybody has test results for any condition. But the anxiety about what the result might be in those 3 weeks reached fever pitch. And I could not focus on anything. I could barely eat. I lost weight because I just didn't have any appetite. I was always worrying about what the worst case scenario would be. So if the result was positive, would that mean cancer, for instance? Would that then mean that I have to start chemotherapy or radiotherapy? Am I going to die? And I've always, ever since I started dealing with health anxiety, have jumped to the worst case scenario. And this, in my head, seemed to be completely rational. Something had been found, and there was, you know, a good possibility in my head that I'd be dealing with something that could potentially shorten or end my life. And when we got to the day of actually receiving the results, I remember getting the tube to Charing Cross Hospital. I don't think I've ever come so close to fainting as I did that day. I felt otherworldly. I couldn't even see straight. And I remember it was an early morning appointment. I was one of the first few people in the waiting room. And I think sometimes it helps if other people are there, because then you can put on a bit of a brave face. But because nobody else was there, as soon as I sat down, I just remember going completely cold. And then I started being quite violently and physically sick. 20 minutes later, I got the result. Turned out that what they found was completely benign. and the surge of relief that went through me was enormous. For a while, I realized at that point that I had to do something about this, because it was starting to consume my every waking thought, my every waking moment. I'd be at work and I'd be Googling symptoms any moment that I had spare. And I decided that I needed to get some professional help with this. So I went through several courses of cognitive behaviour therapy, CBT, on the NHS. But it didn't particularly work for me. And we can talk more about that if you like.
Did you do that online, or was it in person?
No, this is all in person.
Okay.
So I had several courses of CBT staggered over a number of years. And again, these were in different areas. Again, with having moved with my job, every doctor I saw was understandably reluctant to put me on medication as a first course of action. And I was always incredibly resistant to medication at first. And I thought, I want to give therapy a proper go. The first course I had, I didn't really gel with my therapist. And I think it is so important to have a really trusting, strong relationship with your therapist. It has to work, because if you don't feel that you are in a place where you can be yourself or share the things that you are most concerned about, or you don't think that you're getting the results that you might expect or might actually need, then you have to consider whether that is worth pursuing. So the first course failed, and I'll admit that I pulled out of it halfway through because I didn't feel that I was getting much out of it. Second time, a couple of years later, was much better, as was the third course that I had, which was in 2018, first half of 2019, with therapists who really got me. And I think the issue the first time round, and this isn't to denigrate the way that therapists work at all, but I've seen quite a lot of examples of being given exercises out of workbooks where it doesn't feel particularly personalised care. You're being put into a process that is a little bit one size fits all, and they'll try to adjust bits of it to cater to your specific mental health needs. But for me, in that first case, it wasn't really tackling the issues that I needed to get a grip of, which were, I'm really worried about when I have strange physical symptoms that they are potentially life-threatening illnesses and might end up killing me. And I needed a way to be able to break that cycle.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'd pick up on there. I think, not to overly compare the situations, but the issues that I've had with chronic pain very much mirror that same pattern of thinking, that after a while, when pain becomes chronic, you may have had an acute injury to start with, but that acute injury actually may have gone away, and you can have, so I had, MRI scans, all the x-rays, all the stuff to see that the acute injury had gone. But once your body gets into a certain pattern of worrying that something is there, eventually that area kind of tightens up and then is painful, and it's a kind of very self-fulfilling prophecy. So that I think there's maybe an analogous situation there. But what you say about once you do get help, there are two things that I was really interested in. Really, was one, the medication aspect was totally different to what I kind of found. It is in the very first thing that when I went to the GP was that I got offered medication. But the other thing was the therapist thing. And I think what you say about finding the right therapist is so, so important. And I was incredibly lucky that the first psychologist that I tried, we just got on like a house on fire. We had very similar kind of interests outside, that personal, that professional relationship. We were both, mad keen on sports, and it kind of, the talks we would have would kind of go from a very friendly chat and then kind of morph into the more of the therapy stuff. So what was different about the second and third therapist that you saw?
What was different was that we had that rapport, we had that relationship, but I felt like I was being treated as an individual patient as opposed to just another member of a cohort going through a workbook process. And I keep mentioning workbooks because in each of the 3 sessions of therapy that I went through, I was given these exact same workbooks. And I'm sure that anybody who has had health anxiety listening to this will know exactly the ones I'm talking about. They have a number of exercises, they've got kind of cartoons in them. And the first time I was so rigidly focused on those at the request of my therapist, quite a lot of it didn't apply to my specific scenario. Whereas with my later therapists, they really tried to make those exercises work for me, looking at my specific habits, trying to break the cycle. And by the cycle, I mean there's a kind of horrible wheel of doom that people with health anxiety tend to go through. You'll start worrying about a symptom, you'll then start researching it. Dr. Google is not your friend at all. And you will, within seconds, diagnose yourself with the worst possible outcome, whereas more likely than not, it's probably going to be something relatively minor, if anything at all. But as soon as you start researching and you see these doom-laden prophecies, that increases the anxiety more. It reinforces the physical sensations that you're feeling because you're so focused on them. You stop being aware of other parts of your body. And that was a bit of a revelation to me when I was brought in to do an exercise where I was just told to focus on my ear and to think of nothing but my ear. And I'd gone in that morning with the same symptoms that I'd been worried about for the weeks and the months beforehand. And in those, 30, 40 seconds, I'd completely forgotten about it because I was focused entirely on my ear. And I think that underlines the power of health anxiety, and I hesitate to call them mind tricks that it can play on you, but the physical sensations that it creates are truly staggering. And I think we've come some way in our understanding of this condition, and that it's not, and hasn't been for some time now, simply dismissed as hypochondria, where people think that you're fretting over nothing and that it's all in your mind. Health anxiety creates real symptoms. The physical sensations that you are feeling are entirely real. However, they are a product of your anxiety, if that is indeed what is driving them, rather than an illness.
That's exactly the same with chronic pain, in that the pain is very much imagined, as in it shouldn't be happening. There's no physical damage or whatever. But if you put someone in an MRI or a brain scan, of the same areas of your brain would light up that to show that you are in pain. So the pain is very real, but also
Absolutely.
imagined. So it's very psychosomatic. And there's a really good, my psychologist has said a really good story about a guy who comes in from a building site, and he's put a nail through his toe. And I might butcher this story a bit, but he essentially the on-call GP or the on-call doctor in A&E saw what had happened and noticed that there wasn't any blood or anything. So he decided to put him to somehow test. I think he might put him through a brain scan or something. All the areas in his brain light up to show that he is in pain. And the guy takes off his shoe, and the nail has gone in between his big toe and his next toe, so it didn't even go through. But it was his brain played such a powerful trick on him to tell him that he was in pain, that, he he had exactly the same feelings as had it gone through his foot, but it had completely missed. And that strikes me as quite a similar overlap between.
It is, and this is, a really great example of how powerful the brain is and how it can manipulate sensations in your body to completely transform the way you feel physically. And that's why health anxiety is such a terrible thing for some people. And, over the various analyses that I've done and the relentless questionnaires that I've been given over many years to try and rate on a scale where my health anxiety lies, from not particularly serious to all-encompassing, is somewhere in the middle. So I cannot imagine knowing what I do about this, how it must be for other people who are at the extreme end of the scale. And to be honest, it really frightens me, because this is a really serious thing, and it can have, real repercussions. And, case in point, at the end of the most recent bout of health anxiety that I've had, and this was round about last summer, I noticed in the mirror that I had a very small patch of hair on my face missing. Now, I thought nothing of it at first, because I just thought that I'd shaved slightly clumsily, and I thought, a couple of days it will grow back. I have very fast growing facial hair, even though I look terrible with a beard, so I don't grow very long. A couple of days later, it was still there, this gap. And then I noticed sort of about a week later that there were a couple more on my chin. I'm thinking, okay, well, something's not right here. And then I noticed that I was starting to lose a bit of eyebrow hair. And at this point I decided, right, this is something real that I can see, because I physically got hair coming off in the sink in front of me. So I better go to my GP and get this checked out. So saw my doctor, was referred to a dermatologist, and was diagnosed with a condition called alopecia areata. Now, the word alopecia, you automatically think of complete baldness. And it's a progressive condition, doesn't appear the same in everyone. But I'm thinking to myself, right, okay, so I've now got this to worry about. What do I do? And you know what the first thing I did? Started Googling wigs, because that's just how my mind works. So having managed to get the Googling, the relentless internet searching about various medical conditions under control, I got really, really upset and really sad, because I was worried that I was going to lose all my hair. And, for anyone, a hair is a massive part of their identity. And I'm thinking, am I going to lose it? Is this, what's driving this? And so after that dermatology appointment where I got the diagnosis, I was told 90% sure this is caused by stress. You need to do something about your stress and your anxiety now. And this wasn't a case of see how it goes, or try and get things under control and come back in 6 months and we'll review. It's get your anxiety in control immediately, otherwise this problem is going to get worse. So I went back to my GP and I told them about this conversation, and they wanted to put me back in CBT. And I went, I've done 3 courses of it and it hasn't had the desired effect. And the problem with, just as a slight aside, the therapy for me, while it was really useful. And, there are many brilliant psychologists, psychotherapists working in the NHS and in the private sector. I've had experience of both. For me, all that learning, all that work that we did was still pretty much just theory. So if you like, I could understand exactly what they were asking me to do. I could understand how they were asking me to break my cycle of checking and obsessive behavior, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't actually fight the urge. And whatever, at the end of the day, I still couldn't stop thinking about the risk that I might have a serious condition if there was a symptom that I was worried about at the time. So I said to my GP, I don't know really what benefit I'm going to get from another course of therapy. So that was at the point where we decided to start talking for the first time about medication. And as I said earlier, I had been reluctant to take it. I don't know why. I suppose it was a slightly bravado-esque, maybe I can just control it myself. I don't need tablets.
Yeah, I think I was very much the same in that I was offered it maybe 3 or 4 times before the first time I actually accepted it. And for me, I think I was a bit worried that it would alter my personality and that actually it would be more of a sticking plaster rather than addressing the root issues. But I think this might be about what you're about to say. But for me, I think it was very much, I was incredibly lucky that the first one I tried worked for me, which I'm acutely aware isn't the case for a lot of people. But it very much enabled me to actually do the CBT properly and do things like mindfulness properly, which actually, helped address the root causes of stuff. And it kind of helped me do those things. But I don't know if that's a similar situation to you.
Yeah, and you've raised a couple of really important things there. Number one, we should say, if you are in a position where you're thinking about medication, you must have a thorough, in-depth conversation with your doctor before going down this route. Secondly, you are completely right to say that for a lot of people, the first medication they try is not the one for them. Moving to a different one would actually be significantly more beneficial for them. But thirdly, for me, starting on the medication that I'm using, which is called citalopram, it's very widely prescribed. The best way I can describe it is that it took the edge off, and I started to feel better very quickly. In fact, within a couple of days. So the chemistry in my brain has been adjusted since using citalopram sufficiently, in that now I can get up in the morning and the first thing that I think when I open my eyes is not, oh God, I've got a day of worry ahead. That was exhausting. And I think that was part of the reason that I was so stressed and anxious. I was just totally exhausted, and I have a very tiring job as it is, and I work extremely funny hours. So to have that mental exhaustion piled on top of the kind of physical fatigue of doing a very involving job at all hours of the day was just a bit too much, and I realised that I needed a bit of help along the way. It's also important to say that it's not a cure. So the sticking plaster thing is so true. It really is. I think I was a bit concerned initially that at what point do you stop? At what point do you decide that, the medication has done its job, and then what? Do you go back to how you were? Has your brain been adjusted sufficiently that when you come off, things will be better? Will they in fact be worse? There are some very scary stories about the side effects of coming off prolonged use of medication, but it's completely different for everyone. So I think for me, I got to the stage where I thought, I think it's worth taking the chance and seeing what effect it has, good or otherwise. And I wasn't hoping for a cure, and it's not there to completely erase the symptoms that you're feeling. However, for me, it has helped me to get them under control significantly. And, I feel a hell of a lot better as a result. And I think one of the things that is so important as we continue to, evolve as a society in terms of our approach to mental health, people far more open about talking about it now, although there's still significant work to do, is to remove the stigma of medication. There is absolutely no shame in using it. If you had an ear infection, you would take antibiotics for it. If you have a mental health condition and a doctor agrees that medication would be the right course for you, it is exactly the same. And if it helps you to lead a life that is easier in some way, then that justifies it by itself.
Yeah, I completely echo that. I think it was Andrew Flintoff, the cricketer, that said, when he had pain in his knees from playing cricket or his shoulder or whatever, he took a painkiller. And when he was having his low kind of patches, he took an antidepressant, and normalizing it to an extent where the kind of reactions that both of us had don't really happen, and you see it. But I also think it's important that, we do emphasize that antidepressants aren't a kind of fix all.
No, they're not.
They very much kind of, I think for me, it kind of numbs the very high and the very low, and allows me to do the things that I need to progressively get better. So yeah, I think that's important to say. So at the moment, are you, I presume, well, I'm not sure actually, are you going into work for your job?
I am, yes. So I work in the BBC's main newsroom in central London, the one that you see at the start of the 10 o'clock news each night. And it's pretty tough at the moment. We're all socially distanced in there for coronavirus control reasons, obviously. But I'm still going in, doing the job that I usually do. Just to give you a little bit of an insight into my life. I work 3 days on, 3 days off. Those 3 days that I'm on, the days are around about 10 and a half, 11 hours each. So it's quite a quick turnaround. So for instance, if I'm going into work at 11 a.m., for instance, I won't leave until 10:30. It'll be 11:30 before I get back. And then I'll be back in probably the same time the following day. Added to that, I've got to keep across everything that's going on in the times that I'm not in the office. If I'm going in for 11 a.m. again, before I step foot in the door, I'm expected to know everything that's going on that morning, because I don't have a specialism. I'm a journalist who covers anything and everything. So if you hear me reading the news on Radio 2 or whatever, I have to know about all those stories that I'm talking about, so I can give the audience the information that it needs to know. So that can be politics, business, the economy, sports, whatever. And obviously now health, dominating everything. We're not doing anything really that isn't coronavirus, save for one or two stories at the moment. So before I go into work, I will probably have heard at least an hour of the Today programme on Radio 4. I've read every article on the BBC News website. So even before I've done any formal work or written any scripts about coronavirus, I've already read a ton of it at home or heard a load of it. So that's tough for someone with health anxiety to now be surrounded in my professional life by a health story was pretty uneasy at the beginning, I have to say. And when this started to build in March, I remember it quite vividly. I started to get a bit of a sore throat that was switching back and forth again. Now, it's interesting, using the medication, I was able to resist the worst of the internet searching immediately, but the sore throat was hanging around for a while. So after a time, I started to think, well, sore throat now, does that mean the cough and the fever are just around the corner? And if that happens, am I going to go off a bit of a cliff and develop pneumonia? Will I be hospitalized like so many people have been? Will there be space for me? You see, that's something that I'd never really considered before. Before now, I always thought that if I needed treatment for a specific condition, there would at least be room for me. Not necessarily the case now. And if I did end up in that desperate situation, like so many people unfortunately have in the last couple of months, am I going to succumb to it? So that is the thought process, or at least that's the classical thought process that I've had throughout the last decade with health anxiety. Now, like I say, the medication, what it's done, I've been able to rationalize it a little bit more. It's doing the job that I need it to do to contain those thoughts and to make sure that I am in control of them rather than them being in control of me. So I'm still having them, but they're not completely overtaking my mind. But the worries creep in from time to time, and the fear was growing exponentially in my mind, really, when the number of seriously ill patients was starting to rise. And I'm in a business where I'm having to keep a close eye on death tolls, number of people dying in hospitals, other places, here and around the world. You're surrounded by it. And so after those 3 days, certainly initially, having 3 days off to recover was the bare minimum I needed. Some of the day ones, I was mentally exhausted. There were a couple of sets where I just didn't want to get out of bed, really. I just wanted to chuck the duvet over my head and pretend that we weren't all going through this. It's a weird time, but I have no choice, and I know that, and I'm aware of my professional responsibilities. So I've had to adjust to what has become for me, as it has for many people, a new normal.
Is that so? I've heard a lot of people say, and it's something that I definitely feel, that I don't know if it would be the same with you with your specific issues, but a lot of people have said that their mental health has actually kind of either plateaued or improved during this period of being locked down, because I think in my case it kind of puts a lot of things into perspective, but it also removes the kind of a lot of the expectations around what you should be doing, where you should be, all of that kind of stuff. Is that something that you've experienced as well?
Yes, I can certainly see that, there are areas of my mental health that probably have plateaued. In other ways, though, I never particularly used to worry about the news stories I was telling in a way that I perhaps do now. I think it's faded a little bit as we've gone through the pandemic. I mean, it feels incredible that, lockdown only began just over 2 months ago. It seriously, to me, feels like about 6 months, if not longer. And having got used to that balance of imparting the information and being completely surrounded by it versus my health anxiety and looking at it through that prism, I've managed to get sort of a proper grip on it. And it's interesting, actually being out and about, I've probably been out and having a normal routine, in inverted commas, more than quite a lot of people have, because I'm going into work, I'm commuting, I'm driving by car, so I'm not putting myself in harm's way, social distanced in the office. So once all those measures were put in place, I actually felt pretty safe, and I feel pretty safe now because I'm not coming into contact with very many people who could possibly pass the infection on to me. And so that's allowed me to get a grip of the situation. And like you say, there's none of the other pressures that sometimes go along with mental health and expectations, etc. So, you know, in some ways, things are okay. But then there are other days, like I say, when it's just all been a bit much because I've just been surrounded by coronavirus. If you're not working in news, you can at least not look at the news app on your phone or listen to the radio or have the TV on. You could put something on that's going to take your mind off it. For 3 days, pretty much solid, I don't have that choice, and I accept that. But as I say, that has been a management thing for me to make sure that I don't become completely overwhelmed by that and it doesn't affect my work, because as someone who takes very great pride in the work that he does, and I would never want it to be affected by something that I've done. I would personally perceive that, rightly or wrongly, as a weakness. And again, this is something that's come out in therapy sessions that I've had in the past. It's quite the seesaw that I'm sitting on.
We normally kind of start to round things off by asking what you do personally to look after your mental health. But I suppose it'd be more pertinent to ask you, have you changed the way that you look after your mental health in recent times?
Yes, and it started actually before the pandemic began, because I was quite clear that along with the medication, that could not be my only crutch, and that I needed to do other things to go along with it. So I took a few steps. The first one was exercise, and I go through phases where I'm very keenly running, and then months where I can't be bothered. But I actually decided that I was, after quite a long break from it, going to start running again. And then I joined my local gym and swimming pool. I've never really been a gym person at all. So, having your first induction on how to use a set of weights properly at 34 was an experience, but there you go. And the difference that made was absolutely huge. And the thing that I've missed most during lockdown is actually not having access to the swimming pool. I don't have any other means as effective as those 40 minutes where I dive into the water, and for that time, I can just feel my mind slowly working through the thought processes that have been running around the last couple of days or few hours. It helps me to process, it helps me to focus, and it helps to clear my head. And that has been such an important part of the last 6-7 months, getting back into the pool and feeling really quite invigorated every time without fail, even if it was on a cold morning, coming out and thinking, yeah, do you know what, it was really worth having done that. And a similar thing with running. But obviously with the swimming pool being shut, I've had to stick to the road, but I'm still doing it. And that is, having the effect that I need it to have, keeping me fit and also keeping me mentally active as well, in the sense that, those same thought processes are going on while I'm running, and I'm able to switch off a little bit and not worry about the other stuff that's going on in my life. So that's one thing. The second thing has been, and I know you talked about this in previous podcasts, but nature, appreciating the outdoors in a way that I haven't been able to do so much in recent times. I moved at the end of last year to a different part of London. Where I was previously was a ground floor flat that overlooked a very busy road with absolutely no greenery at all to speak of. There was no grass, there were no trees, there were no shrubs. All you had was the sound of traffic passing and very noisy passers-by at all hours of the day. And it didn't help the fact that the flat, just by its construction, was quite dark. So not getting a lot of natural light into the building, so your vitamin D levels start to go down, and you really do feel it. And I don't think I noticed quite how much of a difference that made until I moved to my new flat, which is at the top floor of a 5-floor block overlooking some fields and some trees. And if I look hard enough into the distance, I can actually see a lake. And when I came here, I don't think I had fully appreciated my surroundings until the first morning I woke up. And it was a Saturday morning, and I opened my eyes and the sun was streaming through my bedroom window, which in itself was such a rare sight after the previous couple of years. And I just stayed in bed for 2 hours. I didn't move. I just looked at that view, and I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And it's kind of making me feel emotional talking about it now, because it was such a powerful thing just to be looking at green and to see nature. And at that time of the morning, there was bird song, and it was beautiful. And I got out of bed after those couple of hours, and I thought, wow, I really have been missing this for such a long period of time. And I don't think I will now ever take it for granted. I'm also very lucky to live, I don't have my own garden, but I live next to a very large park. And having that on my doorstep, not only to be able to run around, but to just be able to take in the trees, the animal life. There's another lake there. It's absolutely critical now to the way that I spend my free time, particularly in lockdown. You know, that hour of mandated exercise, when that was still a thing, was such an important part of my mental well-being, just to be able to get out there.
Yeah, I think that's something, and I know this isn't the same for everyone because there are various issues around who gets access to nature and green spaces, but something I can really see, that I really hope for as well, is that, you know, after this all ends, there seems to have been, people seem to have started appreciating green spaces, you know, the bird song at the moment, and just the outdoors a bit more. And I'm hoping that kind of transitions into, after lockdown ends, that we kind of have a bit more of appreciation for the environment, and potentially, you know, there's a chance for a reset on industry and climate change and things.
I hope so. And, you know, I think one of the few positive things about lockdown has been our opportunity to do that, because, you know, so many of us, virtually all of us, leading lives that were so busy, we didn't have time to enjoy what was in our backyard. So when we had green spaces pretty much as our only outlet, our only opportunity to get outdoors, we started to fall in love with them again, I think. And I hope that that has been rekindled enough that we don't forget it and we go back to how we were. I hope that's not the case.
Yeah, we'll see. And just finally, to finish, where can we find more about you, about your work and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Well, I have a website. It's tomhourigan.co.uk, Hourigan. If you want to go and have a look and find out a little bit more about me. I'm very active on social media. My accounts are linked to my website. And having posted fairly recently about my experience with citalopram, I was totally bowled over by the response that I had. It was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And so many people getting in touch, saying that they'd never heard anybody speak publicly about health anxiety before, or they thought they were the only person using medication to deal with symptoms of it. So we need to keep those conversations going. And if anybody wants to talk to me, my messages are always open. And, you know, if you need an ear, then I am here.
Brilliant, Tom. That's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Just a quick note to say that although the things Tom and I talked about we may find helpful, we're not medical professionals. If you're struggling with your mental health, please contact your GP or an organisation like Samaritans on 116 123.